Silver on the Tree by Susan Cooper, Part 3, The Lost Land, Chapter 14, Caer Wydyr. Though they tried, they never found the road again. There was no sign anywhere of the golden horses. Panic had taken them far away, so Will and Bran turned their faces toward the shining tower and tramped over the rough, reedy grass of the pasture land, through clumps of gorse on the firm ground and soggy patches of marsh on lower land where the water still lay. All the lost land was low, a coastal plain, with the sweep of Cardigan Bay at their left hand, and the mountains rising hazily purple-brown far inland to the right. Somewhere ahead, Will realized the River Diffy must run, toward a mouth considerably farther out to sea than the one he had known before. It was as though all the coast of their own time had been given an extra half-mile stretch on its seaward side. Or rather, he said aloud, given back the land it's lost. Given back the land it lost. Bran looked at him with a half-smile of understanding. Except that it hasn't been lost yet, has it? He said. Because we've gone back in time. Will said pensively, Have we? Of course we have. Bran stared at him. I suppose so. Back, forward, back. Will's mind was drifting. He looked out at a sweep of yellow irises among the reeds of a boggy area that they had been carefully skirting. Pretty, aren't they? Just like on the farm near the river. We must be getting near a river ourselves, Bran said, eyeing him a little uncertainly. Very wet it is. I'm parched. Listen, Will said. Can you hear running water? Won't be any good even if it is. Probably brackish, Bran said. But he cocked his head to listen, then he nodded. Yes, up ahead, past those trees. They went on. The bright tower loomed higher now. Though almost obscured by trees, they could see it was topped by a banded dome of crystal and gold, exactly like the dome of the king's palace in the city. There was even an identical golden arrow at the very top, pointing out at the sea. Then they were among a group of scrubby willow trees, with the sound of water growing, and suddenly they came upon a reed-fringed stream moving curiously fast for water on such flat land. Curving round to meet them, it seemed to flow from the direction of the city out to join the River Diffy. On its way to the sea, the water looked clear and cool. I'm thirsty, Bran said. Cross your fingers. He dipped one hand in the water and tasted and made a horrible face. Will groaned in disappointment. Salt? No, Bran said, expressionless. It's perfectly good. He dodged Will's grinning lunge, and they both stretched out on the grassy riverbank and drank thirstily, splashing their hot faces until their hair was wet and dripping. In a gentle patch of water on the lee side of a rock, Will caught sight of Bran's reflection, and was held by it. Only the glint of the tawny eyes were properly like Bran, for the reflected face was darkened by shade, and the wet hair seemed streaked dark and light. Yet somehow, Will felt a strange flash of recognition of the whole changed image. He said sharply, I've seen you look like that before somewhere. Of course you've seen me before, Bran said lazily. He put down his head and blew bubbles into the water, breaking the reflection. The water rippled into 100 different surfaces, glinting, whirling, then seemed all at once a great deal of white in the pattern. Some small warning note rang in Will's mind. He rolled over and saw against the sky, standing over them, the hooded white rider on his white horse. Bran brought his head out of the water, spluttering, pulling a green strand of weed from his mouth. He rubbed the water from his eyes, looked up, and was suddenly very still. The white rider looked down at Will with bright eyes set in a dim white face shadowed by the hood. Where is your master, old one? The voice was soft and sibilant, and puzzlingly familiar, though they knew they had not heard it before. Will said shortly, He is not here, as you know, the white rider's smile glinted. And he told you, no doubt, that something had prevented him from coming, and you were simple enough to believe him. The Lord Merriman is more shrewd than you, old one. He knows the danger that is here, and takes care not to be exposed to it. Will lay back deliberately on his elbows. And you are more than simple if you think to afflict me with such talk. The dark must be in a sad way to use the tricks of idiots. The White Rider's back straightened. He seemed indefinably more dangerous than before. Go back, said the soft, hissing, cold voice. Go back while you still can. You cannot make us go, Will said. No, said the White Rider, but we can make you wish you had never come. Especially... His gleaming eyes flickered toward Bran. Especially the white-haired boy. Will said softly, You know who he is, Ryder. He has a right to a name. He is not yet in his power, the White Rider said, and until then he is nothing, and therefore he will be nothing forever, no more than a child of your century, for without your master you have no hope of gaining the sword. Go back, old one, go back. The soft voice rose to a nasal ringing demand, and the White Rider shifted uneasily. Go back, the rider said, and we will give you safe passage out of the lost land to your own time. The horse shifted again, exclaiming in irritation. The White Rider gave rein and wheeled it round in a wide circle to calm its restlessness. Look, Bran whispered. He was staring at the ground. Will looked down. Under the high, fierce sun, his shadow and Bran's lay short and stumpy together on the uneven grass. But as the White Rider on his horse curved back toward them, the grass beneath the four hooves lay bright and unshaded. Ah, yes, Will said softly. The dark casts no shadow. The White Rider said clear and confident. You will go back. Will stood up. We will not go back, Rider. We have come for the sword. The sword is neither for us nor for you. We shall let you go in safety, and the sword will stay with its maker. Its maker made it for the light, Will said, and when we come for it, he will give it to us, and we shall then indeed go away in safety, my lord, whether the dark allows it or not. The lord in the white cloak looked down at him. His womanish mouth relaxed into a strange, unnerving sneer of relief. If that is what you expect from the land, he said, then you are such fools that we have nothing to fear from you. And without another word, he turned his horse's head and trotted away. Beside the curving river, out of sight, behind the trees, there was a silence. The water murmured. Bran scrambled to his feet, looking uneasily after the rider. What did he mean? I don't know, but I don't like it, Will shivered suddenly. The dark is all around us. Can you feel it? A little, Bran said. Not really, not the way you do. I feel just, this is a sad place. Home of a sad king. Will looked around. Should we follow the river? Looks like it. They could see the dome and the golden pointing arrow of the castle, reaching up out of the trees past the curve round which the river disappeared. The river bank was grassy. There was no path, but no trees or bushes grew out to impede their way. The river itself remained narrow, perhaps 20 feet across, but its bed between the coarse grass of the banks grew broader and broader, a shining expanse of sand. It was clear golden sand now, without the murkiness of mud. Tide's low, Bran said, seeing Will look at it. Like the Diffie. That sand will be covered when the tide starts coming in, and the river will grow twice its size. It's beginning to already. Look. He pointed. Will saw the water eddying in the river. As the direction of its flow began to change, the main stream in the center still flowed out to sea, but at either side the tidal flow from the sea came creeping in. Couldn't drink from it now, Bran said. Too salt. The river broadened as they walked further, and the incoming tide grew more powerful. On the further bank, the trees were smaller and more sparse. They had an occasional glimpse of the broad estuary beyond the scrub and pasture, and the mountains rising far back. Then, all at once, they saw a square brown sail, and foaming toward them on the tidal current came a boat. Its sail bellied out at right angles to the mast between two sturdy wooden yards. Almost at once these clattered to the deck, and the sail came back. The boat swung toward the bank beside them. Will peered in astonishment at the figure furling the sail. "It's Gwion!" Gwion, lean and black-clad, leapt nimbly into the bow with a line, and jumped ashore as the boat nudged the bank. He glanced at Will and Bran, his familiar smile breaking above the neat grey beard, then called something in Welsh over his shoulder to the boat. A chunky man with black hair and red-brown face stood there at the long tiller behind the single stubby mast. It was a broad-beamed boat, not unlike a ship's lifeboat. The man called back to Gwion. Will looked inquiringly at Bran. "About mooring the boat," Bran said, "and catching the tide, though I... Tafla arif yanai me," he said suddenly to Gwion, reaching for a second line from the boat, and together they moved her fore and aft to a pair of trees, swaying in the river as the tide washed by. "Well done to be safe here," Gwion said, a hand pressing each on the shoulder. "Now then, come on." He set off at once along the riverbank at a smart pace. Will followed. He felt as though a great knot of tension had been loosened between his shoulder blades. Explain, said Bran, lengthening his stride to keep up. "How did you get here? Why the boat? How did you know where to find us and when?" Gwion smiled at him. "When you are in your full power, Bran Davies of Clued, you will be confident, as Will here, and not bother to ask such questions. I am simply here because you will need me, and thus I break the law of the Lost Land, which is to have no dealing with either light or dark when they are in conflict. As I shall go on breaking that law, I have no doubt, until the tail end of time. Gently now." His voice dropped, and he slowed his pace, stretching both arms sideways to hold them back. They had come to an end of the scattering of wind-curved oak and pine that fringed this edge of the river. Before them now was the castle of the Lost Land, a shining tower rising over a circle of tall trees. Gwion was suddenly sober. He dropped his arms and stood for a moment, as if he had forgotten Will, Bran himself, and everything except the sight of the lonely glittering tower there before him. "Caer Wydyr," he said, almost whispering, "as beautiful as it has always been, and my great grieving king shut away inside, never seeing its beauty, with indeed no one at all in the Lost Land able to see its beauty except the Lords of the Dark." Will looked all around restlessly. "And they are everywhere, and yet not to be seen." "Everywhere," said Gwion. "Among the guardian trees, but they cannot harm the trees, just as they cannot touch the king in his castle." The great trees grew round the tower in an irregular circle, lapping it with their leaves and branches. It rose from them like an island from a green sea. "7 trees, the lady said." Bran turned to Will. 7 trees, just as the 7 sleepers woke. Over Linwegwell. Once before our eyes, to ride away into tomorrow. The tawny eyes were glinting in his pale face. He stared all around unafraid, as if in challenge, caught up for a moment in a feverish confidence Will had not seen before. Will said slowly, "But there were 6 sleepers." "7 there will be," Bran said. 7 at the end. And not then sleepers by name, but riders like the Lords of the Dark. "Here is the first one," Gwion said, his voice without expression, but Will felt he was deliberately turning the talk aside. Facing them, close to the river, was a crowded clump of slender trunks, green-barked, with broad, round, dancing leaves, and we will pause there.